for us to follow up for you in the segment. But let's hear from Eldon. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robbie. So I don't do energy stuff. We do antimicrobials. So what is that? So essentially we make antibacterial and antiviral materials, and we're using them in high hygiene environments, places like food processing facilities and hospitals, to try to prevent contamination, but also in normal products to help reduce the use of toxic materials that are currently used as preservatives. Yay, cool. So why do we care? Well, long story short, surfaces are making you sick, and they're kind of doing it in two different ways. One is that a surface can be a vector for the transmission of dangerous microbes, so things like bacteria or viruses in a hospital or food processing plant that can make you sick. We've got some pretty shocking stats. 1 in 10 people in New Zealand who enter into a hospital will get a hospital-acquired infection while they're there. We actually lead the first world in terms of MRSA infections, which is not a great stat to have. In these high hygiene environments, there typically as well things like MRSA, which are drug-resistant bacteria, so incredibly hard to kill, and that puts a huge burden not only on our health care system, but it's also a financial burden as well. The other way that surfaces are kind of making you sick is through the use of toxic biocides as preservatives. So if you think about your normal can of paint, that actually goes off if you don't add a biocide to it. So at the moment we're using things called isothiazolines, and that's what's protecting the paint from going moldy before you use it. Europe's leading the way, and that's actually now just had the amount that you can use reduced by 5 times. That's soon to be rolled out in America and in New Zealand as well at some point. So when you think about it, these biocides, when you chuck your paint up on the wall, where do they go? Well, they just evaporate, and that's into the air that you breathe, and then that's what's causing issues with things like indoor air quality. So that's our goal at Inhibit Coatings, is to look at protecting these high hygiene environments and products in a safer way. And it's a massive market. So if you think about antimicrobial coatings, additives, and biocide replacements, that's worth over $20 billion per annum combined at the moment. Part of that is driven by growth from things like COVID and increasing awareness. But the issue is it's a massive market, but everything that's currently used there has a massive drawback. And that is that they're either very toxic, and that means that they're coming under increased regulatory scrutiny, or they cause environmental harm, because a lot of the current solutions that are used are designed to leach out into the environment. So how bad's the problem? The example that we like to use is the Jensen Farms outbreak. So this was in the US in 2011. And what happened is this was a cantaloupe, or rock melon for non-Americans, processing plant. There was a puddle of water on that processing plant floor, and that plant floor had a listeria contamination. A splash of water from that puddle ended up on the conveyor belt. That contaminated 300,000 melons, which then got sent across the US, hospitalizing 142 people and killing 33. Now it's these sorts of applications where antimicrobial coatings in the floor and the conveyor belt would have been able to prevent that transmission of that dangerous bacteria. And that's what we're targeting. So what we've developed is a solution that's safer, more effective, and non-toxic, and a replacement for biocides and antimicrobials. So what do we actually do? Well, we produce a coating that involves nanosilver. So over here we have a little bit of an image. These nanoparticles are typically around about 5 nanometers big. What does that mean? Well, the classic example everybody uses is 1 nanometer is about 100,000 times smaller than a human hair. So we're looking at that sort of size silver. Silver is a really well-known antimicrobial agent, and people have been using it for ages. The issue at the moment with the current silvers is that they're designed to wash out of the coatings. That's how they work. And that means that if you're worrying about the ecotoxicology of these sorts of things, it's pretty nasty, because they are so good at killing bacteria and viruses. So we've designed a coating that can kill 99.99999% of bacteria. But not just bacteria, it's also viruses, yeasts, and molds. It's really, really broad spectrum. As part of our entry into the US market, we've also carried out all of our toxicological and safety testing, and we are non-toxic, non-irritating, and non-sensitizing. So we're in the safest category across the board, which is pretty much unheard of when you're talking about something that's designed to kill microorganisms. So incredibly safe for people and the environment because it doesn't leach out. We've been able to scale it up, and we've been able to do it in a more cost-effective manner, which means that we can apply it to more applications where you wouldn't be able to traditionally. So since my PhD, and also it's probably worth mentioning, like all good startups, we're in a basement. So we're in the basement of the chemistry department at Victoria University at the moment. When we first sort of started Inhibit Coatings, we had about 10 grams of this weird looking stuff, and we tried to figure out what we could do with it. So over the last few years, a lot of that's been around product development and integrating it into stuff that people will use in the real world. So we've scaled up over 20,000 times and now have the ability to produce 4 tons per annum. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we use typically between 0.1 to 0.05% of that 4-ton active ingredient into a coating system that we're protecting. So it goes a long way. We've also applied it to a whole bunch of different coating systems. And it's probably something you don't really think about, but just about every single product you interact with has some sort of coating on it. So textiles are finished with coatings. The timber is obviously coated in probably a polyurethane or a varnish. Not just things like walls and floors. And in fact, we're now working on things like medical devices. So between all these things, epoxies, acrylics, polyurethanes, polyamides is just a fancy way of saying nylon, we essentially can cover just about every single coating system that you're talking about. So what have we actually done with this technology? Well, the very first thing we did was develop a floor coating with a company up in Auckland targeting the food and beverage industry. So we've now got 200 square meters of our floor coating installed in 4 different dairy processing plants in New Zealand. The longest trial we've run has now been 3.5 years without detecting any of the monitored bacteria on that floor. To put that into perspective, prior to that coating being installed, they were getting a positive detection every 2 to 3 weeks. And when that happens, they shut it down, they sanitize because you can't risk the product getting contaminated. More recently, sort of the start of this year, we developed our first textile coating, and we worked with a company up in Auckland to produce 8,000 meters of antimicrobial curtain fabric. That was a bit of a funny story because we've been working with these guys on and off for a couple of years, and we've probably gotten to the point where we had about an A4 size proof of concept that we were like, yeah, this works pretty well. About 3 weeks later, we get a phone call on Friday. It's always a Friday. We've got a customer, like awesome, let's start scaling. And like, they want 8,000 meters, even better. We need to get it done in 3 weeks. Awesome. But yeah, so we had 3 long days before we managed to upscale, produce that material, get it off to them, and ultimately it ended up in a military facility somewhere in the world. We also developed a coating for healthcare. So we have a paint, interior paint coating that's been proven to kill 99.9% of the antibiotic-resistant superbug, MRSA, and this other one, Candida auris, which probably nobody follows this, but so this is an emerging superbug. We had our first death of it in New Zealand this year, but if you're in the US or India, it's particularly bad and becoming endemic. It's horrible. It's really a fungus, and it kills 1 in 3 people that catch it. So it has a very, very high mortality rate. So across all these different applications, we've been working on things like paints, coatings, textiles, and more recently, and pretty excitingly, we've been working in the medical device space, looking at catheters, central venous catheters, and the like. Here's just a few examples of random things we've done. So together, we can kind of cover a wide variety of different applications. So as a small, tiny company in the basement at Victoria University, how do you target all of these different types of applications? So for us, we focused on partnerships to get our technology with the guys who are big players in this space. So we've been really fortunate to forge some really close relationships with, well, some of the biggest companies in the world. So in paints and coatings, we're working with literally the largest in the world out of North America. We're working with some top 10 medical device companies for their applications. And that's how we really see our technology scaling from New Zealand, where unfortunately there isn't a whole lot of manufacturing of these types of products. And for our technology, we really need to be in there at those early stages to have that impact. Oh yeah, then we want some stuff. And that's it.
Very modest and humble, like a good Kiwi entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about some of the awards that you've won.
We've had some innovation awards, particularly out of North America. So there's a conference in the US that we focus on quite heavily, which deals a lot in the large multinationals, but also in defence tech. We've won the Trans-Tasman Innovation and Growth Award as well, which is got some sweet photos with the Prime Ministers. Yeah, that's most of the sorts of things that we do.
Okay. Yeah. So how would people find your products?
Find them? Well, so it's probably slightly more difficult. Through partners, unfortunately, so we're not really providing anything directly. So in New Zealand, we've been working with textile bonding up in Auckland, so they're the fabric finisher. I think they're the only one in New Zealand, which was quite a good win for us to be able to find. And we're working on some developments with local paint companies, but they're not ready to go to market yet. So.
Awesome. Cool. Any questions from people on the floor? Jessica?
What's your competitive market like?
It is quite a competitive market. So the traditional sort of antimicrobial space has a large number of players, but they're all essentially using the same technology. We've been really fortunate actually to scoop one of the CEOs of a competitor company, or ex-CEOs of a competitor company, to be one of our advisors, who's really helping us with our go-to-market strategy and navigate how we can differentiate ourselves so successfully from the other guys. The good news is that when we deal with the large multinationals, they've usually tried out the competitor technologies previously, so they understand the limitations, so we don't really have to explain too much about why we're better.
What's your major point of difference?
So we've kind of got three. So it's longevity is the main one. So because we bind the active ingredient in there, it means that we stay more active for longer. So I think the classic example would be like the silver socks, right? They were a big thing for a while. And when you took one of those pairs of socks that had silver in it to be antibacterial, you whacked it in your washing machine, you lost 75% of the silver after your first wash. That means it's not really going to be antimicrobial anymore. For us, we lose less than 0.1% of our active ingredient when it goes through a wash, even in acid, it turns out. That's one. The other is effectiveness. So we can get away with those really high 99.9991% reductions using very, very small amounts of material. It's typically about an order of magnitude, so somewhere between, depending on which product we're talking about, 10 to 100 times less, which has a massive cost implication too. So we're typically about 40% cheaper than the competing additives do. Not that we like to go in on price, but no, sometimes you do.
It helps. Murray, do you have a question?
Yeah. How do you protect your IP?
We've got a pretty extensive patent portfolio. So we've got 9 running patents currently, spread globally, and then we also have a further 7 still in examination at the moment. So we've got 2 patents in the US currently for process and product related claims. Yeah, we went for pretty extensive coverage, knowing that we wanted to target licensing the technology. So we've got pretty much every major jurisdiction that works in chemicals and coatings covered, and then a few just random blockers for different geographical areas.
Biggest barrier to entering those multiple markets? You talked about getting in early.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So I suppose the biggest barrier is actually regulation. As per usual, anything that makes public health claims, it has regulation associated with it, and that varies massively. So for us, we focused on the US because it's the biggest by far, which means going through the EPA, which has been a process to say the least. But we've got the end in sight now. But when it comes to engaging to get these into products to have that big impact, yeah, we really need to be sort of at that stage where the chemical manufacturer is. That's what makes sense for us, and that's where the volume is. And you know, best way to connect with those guys we found so far is get on a plane and get to a conference, you know, make that technology known. Because again, if we sit back in New Zealand, nobody's going to hear about us.
Nothing's going to happen. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, cool. Other questions? Are we good? Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much, Eldon. Awesome.